During the Second World War, the United States military remained strictly segregated on racial lines. African American servicemen suffered separate and unequal treatment not only in training, but also when serving their country on active duty around the world. However, USS Mason and USS PC1264 broke new ground in challenging such institutionalized racism in the 1940s. These were the first two US Navy vessels to rely almost entirely on black sailors, and in part they helped establish the foundations for the slow but eventual desegregation of the American military. On the 9th of December 1941, the NAACP wrote to Frank Knox, the US Secretary of the Navy, requesting that black naval personnel be allowed to serve above the rank of messman. This was considered a low rank within the US Navy and was reserved for kitchen work and general maintenance of the ship. It was not a rank that carried much prestige and meant that black sailors were prevented from serving in fighting roles. The NAACP's request was denied, but undeterred, they wrote directly to President Roosevelt on the 17th of December. Roosevelt was a little more sympathetic to their cause, but nonetheless he remained sensitive to the difficult issue of anything resembling an attempt to desegregate the military. At the time, the Navy argued that desegregated ships would be bad for discipline. Nonetheless, Roosevelt put pressure on Knox to improve opportunities for black enlistees. Eventually, in March 1942, the Navy's General Board agreed that black sailors could serve above messman rank on land facilities, local defence ships, construction, and importantly, on Coast Guard vessels. By June 1, 1942, the President had made it official policy. The first step towards racial desegregation in the military had been made, however short a step it may have been. USS Mason was a destroyer escort ship designed to escort merchant convoys across the perilous Atlantic crossing between the US East Coast and Great Britain. Since the summer of 1940, Britain had stood alone in Europe, facing the seemingly relentless onslaught of Nazi territorial aggression. Running drastically low on essential supplies, Britain turned to the US for support. Whilst public opinion within the USA was far from behind increasing intervention in another European war, President Roosevelt was keen to assist Britain in her dogged defence without committing to a full military involvement. Delivery of vast amounts of material goods to Britain to sustain her war efforts was one way in which German expansion could be halted. However, Nazi submarines were constantly prowling the Atlantic Ocean in so-called wolf packs of up to 8 submarines at a time, harassing the merchant ships that bravely attempted to transport vital goods to British ports. By 1943, there were thought to be some 400 German U-boats in operation, with up to 150 patrolling the Atlantic at any one time. Even as early as 1941, British shipping losses as a result of German U-boat and naval attacks had reached 98,000 tonnes a week. This was an incredible and unsustainable loss rate, and both Churchill and Roosevelt were well aware of the need for increased protection of merchant shipping, if Hitler and the Nazis were ever to be stopped. Launched on November 17, 1943 at Boston Navy Yard, USS Mason was built directly to help protect the shipping lanes to Europe. After running in the ship's engines and performing a shakedown cruise, the Mason was placed into active duty on the 20th of March 1944. The ship had an initial complement of around 160 all African American sailors, with white men filling all the 6 officer positions. The crew had trained at Camp Robert Smalls III, a segregated training camp where they suffered poor accommodation and unequal treatment. However, on the USS Mason, they found in their captain, Bill Blackford, a man who was willing to advocate for their better treatment and their proper recognition. The Mason made its maiden voyage from Charleston, South Carolina on the 14th of June 1944, bound for Belfast, Northern Ireland. Over the next few months, throughout June, July, August and September, the ship continued making the incredibly treacherous voyages across the most dangerous ocean in the world thanks to the threat of German attack. On the night of the 18th of October 1944, the Mason faced one of its toughest challenges yet. A huge Atlantic storm battered the ship with winds of 80 knots, that's 92 miles an hour, and waves that jerked the ship onto 70-degree inclines before sending it crashing back down to the foaming ocean surface. With all communications lost, the Mason slammed once more into the water and suffered severe damage to its deck. Refusing to leave the convoy and repair in port, the ship continued to sail through the storm as 2 crew members ventured out onto the deck and welded the torn structure together again. Though the seas unrelentingly battered the Mason, the crew nevertheless pressed on and continued their escort duty until reaching their destination port. So impressed with their gallant actions, Captain Blackford recommended the entire crew for a letter of commendation. For many of the crew members, this hard-won official recognition would never come. They finally got it in 1994. On the 6th of January 1945, the crew once again went to battle stations. An object detected by sonar bore all the hallmarks of a German U-boat. Depth charges were fired and the Mason steamed full ahead to ram the submarine. As large pieces of wood floated by them on both sides, the crew realised they had blown up a wooden shipwreck. But the incident was yet more proof of the undeniable bravery of the men aboard in ramming what they thought to be a heavily armed Nazi submarine, undoubtedly risking their lives in the action. Soon, interest in the exploits of the all-African American Navy crew had grown in the USA. A news team came aboard the vessel in early 1945 and the men of the Mason were filmed going about their business for a broadcast by All American News. The footage was used in a short movie called The Negro Sailor that is now available on YouTube and for which I have put a link in the description if you want to find out more or see the men themselves. What impact this had on public opinion regarding the difficult issue of race and wartime service in the 1940s is hard to tell. The Mason was steaming full ahead on a return journey to the US East Coast when she received the news of the Nazi surrender in 1945. Over the next few months, she served in coastal protection operations on the East Coast and as a training ship at the Naval Training Center in Miami, Florida. She was decommissioned in 1945 and eventually sold for scrap in March 1947. In her short career, the Mason successfully escorted 6 entire convoys across the Atlantic. Most importantly, when she was decommissioned, all of the petty officer ranks on board were staffed by black sailors. This was the first in US naval history alongside the submarine chaser PC1264. In honour of the contribution made by the vessel and her crew, the US Navy commissioned a brand new vessel named USS Mason in 2003, a ship that still serves her country today. So one question might remain over why the men decided to volunteer in the first place, considering the unfair treatment and injustice that they knew they would inevitably face. Their motivations may best be summed up by the words of one of her crewmen. "If you call yourself a man, then you defend your home and your country. I felt that if I can get in, then I could help defend my country and also open doors for my son." If you enjoyed this video about the USS Mason, you can check out the other video about the USS PC1264, the submarine chaser, another vessel during the Second World War that had an all African American crew and broke new ground in race relations in the military. Thanks for watching and please subscribe.